Thank you, and welcome to EWTN Live. I'm Father Mitch Pacwa, and tonight we'll be talking with a military historian, Michael Greaney. We're talking about 10 historic conflicts between the powers of Christendom and the Ottoman Turkish Empire. These greatly affected the religious and cultural trajectory in Eastern Europe and Asia Minor. And it's important for us to have a good recollection of these encounters for the sake of Christians worldwide. Now, before we get to that, we want to speak briefly with EWTN's Director of Acquisitions and Co-Productions, Mr. John Elson, about a timely and important show airing on EWTN next week. John.
Good to see you, Father.
Happy New Year to you, and welcome.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
What is this new program?
Yeah, well, I wanted to inform our viewers that next Wednesday, January 15th at 9:30 p.m. Eastern, we'll be premiering a very important documentary, as you mentioned, entitled Fatal Flaws, Legalizing Assisted Death. And producer Kevin Dunn traveled to the Netherlands and Belgium, which in 2002 legalized euthanasia and assisted suicide. Now, by euthanasia, what we mean is death of an individual by a legal injection or fatal drug combination that's been administered by a doctor. By assisted suicide, we refer to the death of an individual who dies following the ingestion, the self-ingestion of a lethal drug combination that they themselves self-ingest after being prescribed by a doctor. Now, Kevin.
So, in other words, it's the difference between killing yourself or having somebody else kill you.
And both are suicide. We have to be very clear with this. Now, as we know, social engineering is preceded by verbal engineering, and so many people who advocate for euthanasia and assisted suicide talk about death with dignity and use these other terms to obfuscate and distract us from what we're really talking about here. Yeah. Now, what Kevin discovered in his in this documentary and through his investigation, that these laws were initially focused on the terminally ill in Belgium and the Netherlands, but they quickly expanded to the non-terminally ill. They've now expanded to those with psychiatric and psychological disorders, those who suffer from Alzheimer's, dementia. Now it's expanded to those who suffer from depression. In Belgium, there's a thing called the death wish, which if you are 16 years old or older, you can basically request euthanasia. And if a doctor doesn't want to help you with that, you can go to an end-of-life clinic where they'll try to, talk to you and understand, what your needs are.
Let's take a quick look at a clip that we have from this series or special.
My 50,000-kilometer journey begins in the remote village of St. Anthony on the island of Newfoundland to meet Sheila Lewis and her daughter Candace. I saw a story about them on the news one night. Candace was born with cerebral palsy and spina bifida. Sheila says she took Candace to the hospital last year to save her life. The doctors pretty much told her to abandon hope, but Sheila wasn't about to abandon her daughter.
If I had to go ahead and do what the doctors wanted me to do, I wouldn't have had her.
And what was that?
Well, they wanted me to do assisted suicide death on her. This doctor that was seeing her first, I told him I wasn't interested in anything to do with assisted suicide death. And he told me, he said, I was being selfish.
This is your story. Yeah. You said a couple of things on the news story. I remember they said, did you want to die? And what did you say?
I don't.
You don't. And yet they were talking to you about dying.
Yeah.
Like, not once did she ever say to them, I want to end my life. Not once. And this doctor that came in and next day after he told me about the assisted suicide death and stuck his face down in hers and said, do you know how sick you are? They had told me that she was dying. Don't cry. It's all done now. It's over.
Yeah.
We just don't want it to happen to anybody else, hey?
No.
Don't want another family to go through this.
Yeah, well, this will be a very important and powerful preparation for, our right to life coverage, because this is another right to life. This will be premiering January 15th at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time on EWTN, and you'll be able to get a copy of it at EWTNRC.com. That'll be item 3529D for disc. So yeah, this is an issue that, well, all of us have to be concerned with. John, thank you.
Father. Thank you, Father.
We'll look forward to the show next week. We'll be back with you in just a couple more minutes with tonight's guest, so please stay with us. Welcome back. Our guest tonight is an author and a military historian who vividly details and interestingly details the successors and the failures of Christendom in its fight against the Ottoman Turkish Empire over a span of about 500 years between the 11th and the 17th century in 10 distinct and yet, from a big point of view, interconnected military conflicts. These are battles that shaped a large part of the world's religious landscape. And they created lasting memories of iconic figures, some of which are popular on TV for other reasons, like Dracula, Suleiman the Magnificent, and of course, Our Lady of Victory. So please welcome the author of the book, 10 Battles Every Catholic Should Know, Mr. Michael Greaney. Michael, welcome.
Oh, thank you.
It's good to have you. Now, you're not an historian for a living. You don't teach history or write history books as your main living. What do you actually do?
Well, professionally, I'm a certified public accountant.
There you go.
And my volunteer work consists of Director of Research for the Interfaith Center for Economic and Social Justice.
So that's a totally different field. But here you are studying or writing about battles, and just from our conversation this afternoon, using the ability to know details and verify so that the numbers all add up in your CPA work, but bringing that to historical accuracy. What got you into this kind of study on the battles between the Turkish Empire and the Christians?
Well, money, but in a sense different from what is usually meant. Some time back, I was contributing articles to a numismatic publication, a coin collecting magazine. And the usual coin collecting article tells you how much something's worth, how much the collector demand is, what the market's going to be, which I consider very boring.
Yeah.
So what I did was, in a series of articles on Irish coinage during the Wars of the Roses, tell the stories behind each of the coin issues, which of course meant telling all about the fun battles and the fights and the politics and the back and forth.
Yeah.
And a gentleman who had just started a new Catholic magazine called the Catholic Men's Quarterly, his uncle told him about these wonderful coin articles that told about more than coins. They were talking about actual history and the stories behind the coins. So he looked that up. And then he looked up the website of CESJ, the Center for Economic and Social Justice, and saw that it was a combination of Catholic social teaching and advanced financial techniques, and decided, oh, maybe I could persuade this fellow to write for his Catholic Men's Quarterly. So he did.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I was also writing articles for Military History Magazine and Military Heritage Magazine. And I don't know exactly what prompted me to focus on that particular area of Central and Eastern Europe, maybe because everyone else was ignoring it in the history books.
Right,
'Cause
right.
mostly,
You don't hear a whole lot of the battles in Hungary against the Ottoman Turks. Sometimes about the Battle of Vienna, maybe, but you just don't hear so much. And these are exciting stories. I mean, the courage and the valor that was shown was amazing, but it's just not that well known.
No, I think one of the things that triggered my interest in the area was Heinrich Sienkiewicz, you know, the Polish-Lithuanian author. Everybody knows. Okay, thank you. As you point out, there's a lot of consonants in there somewhere. At least I know his books. Quo Vadis, which everyone, of course, knows.
Right.
And even the movie adaptations aren't too bad of that. Yeah. But hardly anyone in this country knows about his great trilogy, which, in my personal opinion, and I have no way of knowing it, may have influenced Tolkien in his non-trilogy. Tolkien insisted what he wrote was not a trilogy.
Yeah. But apart from that, you've got to stay focused here.
But reading about, you know, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and its struggles to keep, you know, the Turks out of Europe.
Yes.
And then that, you know, piqued my interest, and so I started looking everywhere. And being a CPA, I have to find out the root causes of these things and find the stories behind the stories.
Yep.
And it sounded much more fascinating than reading just one more story about the Reconquista in Spain.
Right. Well, so here you've got these battles. In the way that you do it in terms of the sequence, going from the 11th century with the Battle of
Manzikert.
The
dreadful day, as the Orthodox call it.
And then all the way over to some of the battles in Poland in the late 1600s, 1670s. Yeah. What do you see as some of the basic issues at stake here?
Well, it's oversimplistic to put it this way, but a lot of it was economics. I mean, there were religious factors in there. The peculiar brand of Turkish Islam was that you had to keep expanding. But that wasn't just purely religious. The Turkish state, the Ottoman Empire, war was a business.
Right.
They had to keep expanding in order to keep the economy alive.
In many ways, the Turkish Empire reminds me of the Assyrian Empire. It was a parasite government that depended on constant conquest to take other people's stuff.
Yeah,
and they just kept expanding in order to get, because they did not know how to really produce in one place. They were nomadic horse soldiers in their roots.
Originally the Seljuks were just nomads.
Right, and as nomads, the idea of having wonderful fertile land that you cultivate wasn't their mentality.
And even trade was not.
No.
Because when they finally captured Constantinople in 1453, they were sitting atop one of the great trade routes of the world and really did nothing with it.
Right. They just saw the conquest. And when the Turks conquered, because there's another dynamic in the Turkish culture of the Ottoman Turk Empire, that they had very little trust in each other. You know, that you had to be careful. So they created troops. The elite troops were janissaries who were all Christian boys that they forced to join their army.
Yeah, they were slave soldiers.
Yep.
And everything that they had depended on what they could get from the Sultan.
Right. but they also weren't part of his family, so they couldn't go to the throne. So they
Of
were
course not.
trustworthy.
So the idea was that if you didn't have any family to attach, you wouldn't feel ambitious for them, and you would be completely loyal to the Sultan, until, of course, the Sultan failed to deliver enough conquests for you.
Right. And that was another part of it. But they, tell us about Manzikert, first of all. This was one of the first major conflicts of the Turks with the Christians.
Yeah. And it really didn't need to happen, especially the way it did. The Turks had invaded Armenia and captured the fortress of Manzikert. And the new emperor who got his, emperor is the wrong term, Basilius. They stopped using the term emperor long before.
And they used Basilius, king.
Yeah. And he had to solidify consolidate his position because no one wanted, the bureaucrats didn't want him in power. So he thought that the opportunity to have a successful military campaign to regain the lost territory and consolidate his position with the army would put the bureaucrats in their place. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work out that way. By the time he got to the battlefield, he had lost over 2/3 of his army without fighting, simply through desertion and basically treason. By the time they engaged, the real battle didn't start until Romanus Diogenes, the Basilius, thought it was over. They made a big mistake. A lot of the army that they still had left were mercenaries or untrained levies, and when they reversed the standards, which meant, okay, we withdraw, they thought it meant surrender or retreat. And it caused massive confusion in the ranks. And then the rear guard, which was under the command of a bureaucrat who wanted to get rid of Romanus Diogenes, deserted, which left him at the mercy of the Turks.
Yeah.
And they captured him. Strangely enough, Arp Aslan, I think I got the name right, treated him very well and restored him to with actually a token ransom, because he figured it's going to be easier dealing with a defeated emperor who owes him money than with some uppity bureaucrat who doesn't understand the situation at all. And if it had gone that way, the Byzantine Empire probably still would have been intact for the next 1,000 years.
Right.
Unfortunately, when he got back to Constantinople, someone else had seized power. Yeah. And they killed him and then repudiated the tribute that was due to the Turks, which said, okay, now you just gave us an excuse to invade. And within a couple of generations, they had lost most of the empire.
Right. And this loss of the empire in what we call today Turkey, then was known as Asia Minor or Asia. Yeah. That, sets up this, loss, and they still didn't take Constantinople until 1453. So it still was another few hundred years. But these incursions continue all over as they kept eventually getting Constantinople. They went up into Hungary. Why were the Turks so interested in Hungary?
It was the gateway to Europe. Mm-hmm. If they could take Hungary and hold it, then Vienna would be wide open.
Right.
And to be able to take Europe, you needed to take either Rome or Vienna. Mm-hmm. Because once you took one of those two, you had Europe in a pincher.
Right, right. So they had both Vienna and Rome in their long-term sights, and that was key to a lot of the upcoming battles. And some of the sultans swore oaths that they would turn St. Peter's into a mosque that they had done to Hagia Sophia in Constantinople.
Or a stable.
Or a stable.
Suleiman the Magnificent said he was going to stable his horses in St. Peter's and feed them the Blessed Sacrament.
Mm-hmm. So this, which means at least he knew enough Catholic theology to know what would be blasphemy to us. Now, tell us about some of the heroism with these battles. What was going on with people like Dracula and others?
Well, Dracula, if all you know is Bram Stoker's Dracula,
Yeah.
you know, the Anglo-Irish author, you don't know Dracula, because pretty much the only thing that is in that novel is the name Dracula.
Right, right. There's nothing to do with the real Dracula.
The so-called real Dracula, and I hesitate to use finger quotes, but consider them quoted.
Yeah.
It was Vlad III of Wallachia, not Transylvania, although the accents are probably about the same, I don't know. He had been a captive of the Sultan, Mehmed the Conqueror, who had taken Constantinople just a few years before. And he decided he didn't like the Turks very much. But he did
Vlad didn't
Vlad,
like it.
yeah. And but he did learn a lot from them, like how to torture people and how to fight. He knew every way that would scare the devil out of the Turks. Because of the way they treated others, he figured that must be what they're afraid of most. And he then set out to prove it. He pretty much started a one-man crusade against the Turks. And then he appealed to the Pope for help. He appealed to all the rulers of Europe for help. The Pope said, if I can get you the help, I'll get it for you. And of course, no one came through.
Right.
Others got money to help Vlad, but then they spent it on advancing their political aims in Central and Western Europe, and pretty much left Vlad to his own devices. But even then, he almost succeeded, because he lured Mehmed into Wallachia, and it was called, the great battle then was called the Night of Attack. And had the plan worked, he would have killed the Sultan, and the Turks would have retreated and probably have had to leave Constantinople. But unfortunately, as you know, no battle plan ever survives contact with the enemy. And some things went wrong, but he almost succeeded.
And there's another famous battle known as Mohawks. What happened there?
Well, Suleiman the Magnificent.
This is also in Hungary.
Right. And he decided he was going to take, Buda, the capital. Pest is the industrial city that was across the river, or the.
Right.
And the dynastic struggles in Hungary were already tearing the country apart.
Right.
And it's extremely complicated. I try to make it as simple as possible in the book. But basically, there were three claimants to the throne. Unfortunately, the one who had it, although he was brave and virtuous, he was also young and inexperienced. And the nobles that he had to rely on that would fight were, to put it politely, bullheaded. And the Turkish tactics, which were very crude by modern standards, worked perfectly against the Hungarians, because the Hungarians' tactics were even more crude. They refused to use gunpowder, apparently because it was unchivalrous.
Right.
And so they charged in full armor across swampy ground at fixed artillery positions, which is suicide in any event. If you've ever heard the charge of the Light Brigade,
Right.
that was against placed artillery, which is complete suicide. Well, that wiped out the heavy cavalry of the Hungarians. And then when the peasant levies, the infantry, tried to pull back in retreat, that's when the Turkish cavalry and other troops attacked them. There were virtually no survivors to the battle.
Right.
One of the bishops that was there, who was killed, said right before it, the battle plan was so stupid that Hungary will soon have 20,000 new martyrs.
Yeah.
And he was right.
Yeah. And so you have the Turks who came into Eastern Europe, Asia Minor and Eastern Europe, and they're moving in that direction. But there's another part of your book that deals with a series of other battles that occur in the Mediterranean Sea, that the Turkish army and navy were moving along North Africa as well, and they were trying to get to Rome. So you had this one pincher from the east to go to Vienna. Then you have these other attempts to go to Rome. So they went to very important battles like Malta and Lepanto.
Yeah.
Tell us about those.
The Great Siege of Malta. You had, it's the battle, or the siege, actually started when the knights, whom the Turks, of course, considered pirates for their habit of raiding Turkish shipping, with some justification. They took a galley laden with a fortune that belonged to Suleiman's harem. Well, if you do that, of course, you're never going to be quiet. You're never going to get peace again, because the entire harem is going to be after you to go punish these knights, right, which he decided to do. And he put together one of the finest military campaigns that he had ever put together.
Right.
100,000 picked troops, which he threw against this tiny little island in the middle of the Mediterranean, which was essential to take because it was the stepping stone to Sicily, and Sicily is the stepping stone to Italy, right, which you need to take before you take Rome.
The Allies had the same kind of concerns during World War II.
Exactly.
You know, that was very much
I mean,
same.
People will say, why on earth was he bothering with this tiny little rock in the Mediterranean? Well, look at a map.
Yeah, right.
And you'll find out why.
Exactly. So he sends 100,000. How many of the Christian soldiers were there on Malta?
Well, there were approximately 500 knights, most of them past retirement age, because they were scattered throughout Europe. Malta was their temporary headquarters. Right. They had lost Rhodes about 20 years before.
And you mean by Rhodes, the island of Rhodes?
The island of Rhodes.
Right.
And they had about 500 knights, as I said, most past the age of ordinary retirement, about 1,500 men-at-arms, and then a couple thousand Maltese volunteers and peasant levies and guerrillas. By the end of the siege, they had had a few hundred more join them. Mm-hmm. Some of them sneaking through the enemy lines to do it. They even had a couple of Jews who said, you know, we're tired of these Muslims. We're going to fight with the Christians to defeat them. So they volunteered. Don Juan of Austria had to be forcibly restrained from joining the Turks by his brother Philip II. I mean joining the Knights.
Joining the Knights, Malta.
Cut my tongue out right there. Yeah. The Turks did nothing but make mistakes. They had one of the best equipped armies in history up to that point, and they blew every single thing they tried, fortunately for the Knights.
Right.
They tried to take the little castle of St. Elmo, which was, why? It was out on a promontory, and it overlooked a harbor that the Turks didn't need. So they spent a month and a half taking this tiny little castle, sacrificing tens of thousands of troops to do it, and gained nothing.
And it was just a few knights in there.
Yes.
Just a handful.
Of course. They were being, re-garrisoned from across the bay.
Right, right.
Which, as soon as the new Turkish commander, who had been sent out personally by Suleiman, realized this, he stuck a galley into patrol to cut them off.
Right.
But he was killed in the final assault, and so they went back to making stupid mistakes again. Yeah.
And this, in some ways, is a very key defeat for the Turks. Losing Malta and the Christians hanging on to it was a great victory for them. Again, we're talking about hundreds of people.
Yeah, it was possibly the first acknowledged defeat of the Turks. Yeah. Because they had failed at the siege of Vienna, but because their stated reason for the siege could not have been realized anyway, they could claim, oh, this was really a victory even though it was a defeat. This was in 1529. But then in 1565 at Malta, there was no way you could dress that up as a victory.
And it's something that you also see, not too many years after the Battle of Malta, the Siege of Malta, is the Battle of Lepanto. Now, a lot of us Catholics know about it because the Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary is on the anniversary of that battle. This was a Christian fleet looking for the Turks and searching them out to find them, wasn't it?
Yes. What had caused the Holy League to be formed was the fact that the Turks, now under the leadership of a sultan called Selim the Drunk,
Yes.
And he decided he wanted the wine of Cyprus to add to his conquests. So he invaded Cyprus, took Nicosia, the capital, in a rather bloodthirsty battle, and then took Famagusta in a negotiated surrender, which the commander at the time completely violated, which outraged the Venetians.
And by the commander, you mean the commander of the Turks?
The commander of the Turks violated the very truce that he had given.
Right.
The rather disgusting details I omitted from the book.
Yeah. There were. It was a matter
It's
of
bad enough what I wrote.
torture and enslavement of people he told will let you walk.
Yeah, not only walk, but go with full military honors.
Right. And he totally went against his word and did horrible tortures. That battle got the Christians to realize that the Turkish government could not be trusted, their army could not be trusted, and if you don't stand up, you will be wiped out.
Yeah, it was becoming very clear that nothing was going to stop the Turks from invading Europe, either from the north or from the south.
Right.
And so Pius V was able to put together a holy league, and he even got the Protestants in on it. Elizabeth I sent ships and money.
Yeah.
That's how
she knew what this meant. Sometimes some of the Germans didn't realize it, but
no, they
the northern Germany, but she did, and others did. So they formed a league. They built the largest Christian navy up to that point, and they went hunting for the Turkish navy.
Yeah, and they didn't have far to look either. One of the things that they did was in their selection of commander-in-chief, Don Juan of Austria, probably one of the most popular figures of the time. Militarily, not the best selection, but he listened to his advisors. And so...
And when one of the great things about this, we have to get to a break, but one of the great things about the Battle of Lepanto is that they were still quite outnumbered by the Turks.
By about a third.
Yeah, they were about a third the size of the Turkish fleet.
Well, about two-thirds, by a third of it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And so it was a matter of the wind shifting, and the Christians thought it was a matter of a lot of prayer. That Pope Pius V called everybody to pray the rosary, and they also had an image of Our Lady of Guadalupe and the admiral's ship, and that prayer was essential.
Yeah, every man in the fleet went to confession and prayed the rosary.
Before the battle.
Yes.
Yep.
Whether Catholic or Protestant, it didn't matter.
Yep.
And they also freed all the slaves on condition that they fight. But then they also did something militarily very intelligent. They got rid of the rams, which weighed ships down and made them more maneuverable, which meant that they had to rely on cannon rather than on ramming a ship and then fighting hand-to-hand. Yes.
Galley battles. This, I enjoyed this book very much. It's a very exciting book, and you see that there's a great deal of pathos in the way that these battles were fought. I urge you to get a hold of it. It reads really well. It's called 10 Battles That Every Catholic Should Know by Mr. Michael Greaney. And you can get that from EWTNRC.com, our religious catalog. It's item number 2683. We're going to come back with some of your questions and comments in just a couple of minutes, so please stay with us. right, welcome back. A couple things that you notice when you hear the stories of these battles is that the Turkish armies tended to be enormous, like 100,000 that went to Malta.
And that was on the small size.
And at the Battle of Vienna, it was also
around a quarter of a million.
Yeah,
estimate.
Quarter of a million, 250,000 soldiers. This was one of their tactics, to have absolutely enormous, crushing numbers to fight against the enemies and take these territories.
Yeah, it was a matter, I suppose you could say, of military philosophy. To the Europeans, war was not a business.
Right.
And if you were engaged in a war, it was to gain some objective, such as you had just failed at diplomacy, or you needed to take that city, or for some other reason. So your battle tactics were designed to preserve life as much as possible, keep as much intact as possible, so that you could use it later. Because the way these alliances went back and forth in Europe, somebody you fought last year may be your best friend next year.
Right.
To the Turks, war was a business. And the idea was to get as much loot as possible, as quickly as possible, and the fewer people you shared it with, the better. So you just threw soldiers straight at the objective and overwhelmed them with as much force as possible, as soon as possible.
Right. And, it's really very different tactics than occurred during the Crusades. That you don't see these enormous Arab armies because they didn't have the same population, for one thing. And you don't see the enormous death counts that you see after some of these battles. That they're after Vienna, how many of the Turks died after the siege of Vienna?
You'd have to say which one.
All right, 16, and this was 1680.
1683.
Yeah.
That's not covered in my book, but I understand it was a slaughter. That's when John Sobieski relieved the siege.
Right, and I think it was over 100,000 of the Turks died in in the chaos of running away.
As I understand it, as I said, I haven't researched that particular battle, but all their offensive weaponry was pointed to the city. And the Poles came down off the Kallenberg.
Right.
And if you want to see something terrifying, just take a look at those winged hussarius coming down off of a mountain, heavy armor with their lances from behind you.
Yeah. And they had an enormous banner of the Blessed Mother that they unfurled and just rode in. That seemed to be part of the fear too. But it's, so they would have these huge losses. And that wasn't the case in the Crusades. Sometimes, when I've read the Muslim and the Christian chronicles of the Crusades. And sometimes a few hundred people, maybe 1,500, most of them relatively small numbers. In the battles, because they actually wanted to keep hostages.
Of course.
And you make more money from buying back hostages from each other. But with the Turks, it was oftentimes, enormous mass slaughter or themselves getting killed.
Yeah, well, they did the same thing to other Muslims too.
Yeah, right.
This is one reason why, say, for instance, at the siege of Szegedvar, the Hungarian Alamo, you had a defense force holed up in this tiny little castle, not only Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, and Jews.
Yeah.
All fighting against the Turks, and none of them were willing to surrender. That's how much they hated the Turks.
And also may have feared what would happen to them if they did get caught.
Oh, they knew what would happen with them.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the way that the Turks had treated the Egyptians, who were Muslim.
Yes.
That was very tough. So this was a big issue. And I think for us to understand what this meant, to be standing up against one absolutely enormous army after another. It was a series of these enormous Turkish armies coming into Europe and, trying to take over. And that was not easy to do. And yet, what's important was the Christian defenders, small in number for most part, they just stood there. You do cover not the Battle of Vienna, but some battles in Poland, part of the Polish Commonwealth in the last chapter.
Yeah, that was toward the, it's actually more toward the south.
Right.
In what is now Ukraine, I think.
That was
the
part
map
of the
was very
Polish
fluid.
it was part of the Polish Commonwealth in those days.
Yeah, and even today, certain parts of that, what are now Ukraine, used to be Poland, 100 years ago. So.
Yeah, right. That's right. Well, until 1945.
Yeah.
But talk a little bit about that battle against the Polish Commonwealth.
That was just as Lepanto was the high watermark, so to speak, of the Ottoman Empire at sea. The siege of Hochim was, and I'm probably mispronouncing that, but there's a dozen ways to pronounce all of these things, as well as to spell them, was the high watermark on land. Mm-hmm. You had a new sultan who had to prove himself. He was only 18 years old, but he had his hold on his throne was very shaky at the time. So he had to, prove himself to his janissaries, and unfortunately, he didn't do it. He managed to get bogged down in this siege of this fortress that had people, soldiers from everywhere. You had Cossacks, you had Russians, you had Lithuanians, Poles, Ukrainians, Germans, everybody.
Yeah.
And which the Turks thought, because this force is so disparate and they're going to start fighting each other, but they didn't.
Right.
And in the end, they negotiated a truce, and by the time the Sultan got back to Istanbul, they killed him.
Right.
It was the first instance of the assassination of an Ottoman Sultan.
Right. And which also points out another one of the inherent weaknesses in the Turkish system, that when a sultan died, then one of his sons, from a large number, they had a large harem, and had lots of different sons there, and whichever man became the sultan would kill all of his brothers. So this also led to the increased weakness of the governmental structure in the Turkish Empire.
Yes, which was exacerbated by the fact that it wasn't always the better candidate who won. It was the one who managed to get backed by the most capable people, who wanted to manipulate him.
Right.
This is how you got a sultan following Suleiman the Magnificent called Selim the Drunk.
Right. Now, we can look back on all these battles and what these folks did that prevented the Turks from overrunning all of Europe. That's ultimately what they got done, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and whether it be Malta in the west and Lepanto, or whether it be Hutton or the siege of Vienna in the eastern part of Europe. When we look back at that today, why is it that you think Catholics should know these histories?
Well, first of all, of course, if you don't know your history, you're probably going to make the same mistakes all over again. Mm-hmm. The way George Santayana said, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Mm-hmm. And even given that, we seem to be making the same mistakes over and over again. Mm-hmm. We're not looking at the root causes of these things. Mm-hmm. Remember, I said something that it may be a little bit simplistic, but in a sense, most wars are economic in nature. Mm-hmm. And the people who are most apt to take something from someone else and start a war are those who think you have something they want, whatever form it takes. So, and this is where, you know, my work as Director of Research for CESJ comes in, because our goal is that which Leo XIII pointed out in Rerum Novarum in 1891. The goal of a well-ordered society should be to make as many people as possible owners. And this is particularly important when you have advancing technology displacing human labor from production. If you can make people productive, you're going to make them have the foundation for happiness and virtue. As you pointed out, the Turkish Empire was not productive. They looted.
That's right.
Now, if they had engaged in production and made the empire productive based on their own resources, you probably would have seen a lot less conquest or attempts at conquest and a lot happier people.
Yeah.
You may even have the Turkish Empire still around today, which you don't.
Right, right. Yeah, collapsed at the end of World War I. But it was long coming. It was after the Siege of Vienna in 1683, the decline is just steady. You know, with Peter the Great of Russia taking parts of the Turkish Empire, and then the other European powers getting involved and taking more and more parts of the Turkish Empire, all the way until its dissolution in 1919.
Yeah, with the Arab Revolt.
Right.
Which, if you've seen Lawrence of Arabia, you know mostly what was going on.
You get an idea. And so, and then what mistakes ought we then to look not to make?
Well, it's not so much a mistake that you shouldn't make as what you should be doing. Now, I like to think of what we're talking about when we talk to, if you, as Pope Paul VI said in his message of peace in 1972, if you desire peace, work for justice. And Pope Francis, you know, reiterated this in his message for peace a few days ago. If you can deliver justice to people, and not just a vague sounding socialist type of justice, but true economic justice, true social justice, where where you've structured your institutions so that everyone has the chance to become more fully human, more virtuous, productive, more.
And can enjoy the fruits of their production.
Yes.
And, you know, what they acquired justly, you know, that should be a goal for every society.
Yeah, so what we're talking about is not a moral alternative to war, but a moral preventive of war.
And that's something key. And I think your point about, you know, wars being so economic, I mean, we saw in the last century the horrible violence, mass violence, again, worse than we'd seen in any other period of history, as various forms of socialism vied with each other and with capitalism. You know, the National Socialists under Hitler in Germany, and the Marxist Socialists in Soviet Union, and then the capitalist countries of the West. I mean, these are different and competing forms of economics.
Yes, and it all started, you know, in its modern phase. I mean, the problem has always been with us. The late 18th and early 19th century, as more and more people were being alienated from society, you had decreasing small ownership, concentrated ownership by the capitalists,
Right.
and society seemed, you know, just seemed to be dissolving. More and more people were being alienated. So what you had was something developed that Gregory XVI in 1832 called the New Things, Rerum Novarum. What we would later call modernism, socialism, and New Age. Socialism actually started out being called the democratic religion, or the new Christianity, or Neo-Catholicism. It has 1,001 names. But it was all intended to replace traditional forms of political structures, religious structures, and the family with a single monolithic entity, whatever you wanted to call it. And they came up with a lot of names for it.
Yeah.
But in the end, we ended up calling it socialism,
Yes.
which is one thing under many names. And I like to say that capitalism is many things under one name.
Yes.
But socialism, the way I like to characterize it is, socialism is the philosophy of the new things. Modernism is the theology, and the New Age is its logical result.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize just how much socialism is infused with this esoteric thought and even the spirit of modernism.
I think that's right. It's built on a type of optimism that that denies original sin.
Oh, yes.
And the reality of sin, and therefore everybody gets angry because I'm oppressed. I don't get all the stuff that I want. Life is hard. I suffer. It's not fair. And they get all upset and they get a little crazy after a while.
Well, this was St. Simon, who founded the Church of St. Simon and wrote a book called The New Christianity in 1825 that was published right after his death. He said that every society should be directed toward improving the material life of everyone with a special emphasis on the poor, which sounds really good until you realize, but is that the meaning and purpose of life? Or is the meaning and purpose in life to become more fully human, acquire and develop virtue, to become more like God, in whose image we're made?
I'm going to go with that.
I would hope so.
I'm going to stay with that. But one of the things we also have to stay with is the limitations of time, because we're not God and we're not truly eternal. Again, I want to encourage you to get this book, 10 Battles Every Catholic Should Know, by Michael Greaney. Again, EWTNRC.com, item number 2683. And, we've been talking about past wars and battles and horrendous ones trying to take over Europe. But we also have to pray for peace in the present. Now is the time, as things are sort of tense in the Middle East. Let's pray that there be a reduction of that tension and just working out of these issues for all involved. May the Lord bless all of you and keep you, cause his face to shine upon you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. And again, please remember to keep us in between your gas bill, electric bill, and cable bill. And God willing, we will be able to pay all of our bills too. Thank you, and God bless.